This is CCTV International. Chinese President Jiang Zemin expresses his condolences to American citizens in the wake of the terrorist attacks. As the smoke clears, rescue workers in New York and Washington start sifting through the debris to search for survivors as thousands are feared dead. And around the world, oil prices have soared and global financial markets are down as a direct consequence of the terrorist attacks. Hello and welcome to Worldwide Watch. I'm Lu Xing in Beijing. Topping this bulletin, Chinese President Jiang Zemin is expressing his shock in the wake of a terrorist attack at the heart of the United States. Hijackers armed with knives apparently seized control of 4 airplanes Tuesday morning. 2 planes hit New York's World Trade Center, while another struck the Pentagon in Washington. In a message conveyed to U.S. President George W. Bush, President Jiang said he was shocked to learn of the disastrous attacks. On behalf of the Chinese government and people, he expressed sincere sympathy to President Bush, to the American government and people, and condolences to the family members of the victims. Jiang Zemin said that the Chinese government has always condemned and opposed all manner of terrorist violence. President Jiang Zemin also has deep concerns for the safety of Chinese citizens now in the United States. He has asked all the Chinese organizations in the U.S. to provide all necessary aid to their compatriots affected by the tragedy. Meanwhile, condemnation of terrorism and condolences for the victims continue to pour in from China. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Zhu Bangzhao said that China has consistently opposed any kind of act of terrorism. Beijing has also ordered the Chinese embassy and all its consulates in the U.S. to provide all necessary assistance to any Chinese injured in the attacks. Chinese Foreign Minister Tang Jiechuan also offered condolences for the attack. He called U.S. Secretary of State Colin Powell late on Tuesday night to express his deep sympathy to Powell and to the American people. As New York and Washington wake to a new day, the horror of the worst terror attack on U.S. soil is taking on a vivid, grisly reality. The billowing smoke that clouded the enormity of Tuesday's disaster has begun to thin, and rescue crews are starting to sift through the ruins of what were once the symbols of U.S. financial and military prestige. Thousands of people are feared dead after hijacked airplanes slammed into the Pentagon and the World Trade Center, causing the landmark Twin Towers to collapse. Steve Netterton has the latest on the rescue efforts.
Armed with cranes, digging equipment, and sniffer dogs, searchers headed into the twisted remains of southern Manhattan early Wednesday. Police said some people trapped under the debris had called family members on their mobile phones, begging for help. At least 2 police officers were pulled alive from the rubble. Hospitals in New York were flooded with injured, and paramedics and volunteers hurried to triage centers. Residents lined up around the country's hospitals to donate their blood to the victims. Temporary morgues were set up at hospitals and piers along the Hudson River. Officials say it may take weeks to determine the number of dead. Hundreds of firefighters and dozens of police officers who responded to the first attack are missing and feared dead. New York's mayor says at least 1,100 people had been treated for injuries by Tuesday night. In Washington, flames spewed from the Pentagon throughout the night. Defense Department officials fear hundreds may have been killed. Major government buildings in the city were evacuated, including the White House, the Capitol, and the Treasury. Before the crash, passengers on at least one of the hijacked planes called relatives, saying the plane was hijacked. They said there were 3 or 5 hijackers armed with knives, but failed to identify their nationalities or other traits. After the attacks, all U.S. commercial air traffic was shut down. Major buildings and landmarks across the country were evacuated, and sports and entertainment events were canceled. The U.S. Federal Aviation Administration says all commercial planes will remain grounded until noon Eastern Time on Wednesday. Steve Nettleton, CCTV.
Now let's take a brief look back at exactly how the tragedy unfolded. Here's Feng Li with details.
The first hijacked plane, American Airlines Flight 11, struck the World Trade Center's North Tower in New York at about 8:45 a.m. U.S. Eastern Time on Tuesday. Less than 20 minutes later, a second hijacked plane, United Airlines Flight 175, crashed into the South Tower. The South Tower collapsed at 10 a.m. and was followed within 30 minutes by the North Tower. Affected by the explosion, a 47-story building in the World Trade Center complex also collapsed about 7 hours later. At 9:45, a third hijacked plane, American Airlines Flight 77, crashed into the U.S. Defense Department headquarters at the Pentagon, causing a huge fire. A 60-feet section of the building collapsed into rubble. U.S. Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld was in an office at the Pentagon at the time and helped with the rescue operation. At 10:10, a fourth hijacked plane crashed about 80 miles from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. In a televised speech to the nation at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time, about 12 hours after the worst terrorist attacks in U.S. history, U.S. President George W. Bush called on all Americans to unite against terrorism.
And freedom will be defended. I want to reassure the American people that the full resources of the federal government are working to assist local authorities to save lives and to help the victims of these attacks. Make no mistake, the United States will hunt down and punish those responsible for the...
Meanwhile, U.S. forces worldwide were put on the highest alert, Force Protection Condition Delta, meaning extra guards, restriction on personnel movement, and other precautions. Feng Li, CCTV.
World leaders have been unanimous in their condemnation of the attacks. As PGN reports, their reaction to the news has been one of shock and outrage.
The United Nations Secretary-General Kofi Annan said the world has been traumatized by the attacks. He offered his profound condolences to the families of the victims and people of the United States. In Europe, Russian President Vladimir Putin called on the civilized world to join together to fight what he called the plague of terrorism.
Today's event in the United States of America goes beyond the framework of national borders. It is an impudent challenge thrown down to all humanity, at least to civilized humanity.
Other European leaders, including German Chancellor Gerhard Schröder, French President Jacques Chirac, and British Prime Minister Tony Blair, also sent their condolences and expressed their support to the American people. NATO Chief Lord Robertson has expressed the alliance's support for the United States. In Asia, Japan called the attacks dastardly. The Japanese government set up an emergency committee to tighten security on U.S. facilities in Japan on Wednesday, a day after the airplane attacks in New York and Washington. In Gaza, Palestinian President Yasser Arafat also condemned the attacks, saying they are outrageous and unbelievable. Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon declared a national day of mourning in solidarity with the U.S. Taliban authorities in Afghanistan denounced the attacks at a news conference in Kabul. The Taliban also said Saudi millionaire Osama bin Laden, taking shelter in Afghanistan, was not responsible for the attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. Page CCTV.
In Beijing, several prominent world figures gave their reaction to the attack on the sidelines of an international forum. Han Bin reports.
A former U.S. National Security Advisor says that the United States must deliver a powerful response.
Because this will require some effort, and this will require very serious action. It will involve undertakings which involve the use of force internationally. And we are going to hold responsible not only those who did it, but those who sponsored it and those who provided facilities for planning it. So there will be a serious international response by the United States. We live in an age in which humanity has at its possession means of inflicting unprecedented damage. And it's going to be a challenge to all of us to exercise self-restraint. And therefore, this, in a way, is a test of the international system in the 21st century.
Other figures calls for strengthened international cooperation to attack terrorism.
We have to all move towards creating a situation where we can restore the world to a degree of normalcy where people are able to live without the apprehension of terror.
Many believe the tragedy is a cause for reassessing security issues in the 21st century. Hanbin, CCTV.
Ordinary Chinese people reeled with shock as news of the aircraft attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon spread throughout the country. Hanbin again went to see what the people are saying.
In China, shock was the first response. Then the attacks became the #1 topic of conversation. Most newspapers carried front-page pictures of the World Trade Center billowing smoke into the sky over Manhattan. China Central Television, as well as local TV stations, have all aired the attacks at the top of their bulletins. At an ongoing international forum in Beijing, the event was widely discussed among the Chinese participants. The president of the Chinese People's Institute of Foreign Affairs echoed the feelings of many.
In the name of the Institute, we solemnly condemn any terrorist act in the world, and we express our deep sorrow to the victims who lost their lives.
Professor Yan Xuetong says that the deadly attacks were highly organized with far-reaching consequences.
U.S. is not easily to get the support from all over the world. But I'm sure U.S. will get the major powers' support in terms of fighting against the terrorism, and U.S. will get many countries' support.
Some analysts are saying that the attacks give the U.S. government the push it needs to review its national security. Hanbin, CCTV.
Steve Netterton now offers us a brief look at the World Trade Center towers and the Pentagon.
The World Trade Center towers stood around a central plaza at the southwestern tip of Manhattan in New York City. It took 7 years to complete construction of the complex, which was finished in 1973. The complex of 5 buildings was popularly named Window on the World for its 410-meter height and 110 stories. The giant skyscrapers had a floor space of 840,000 square meters and were able to accommodate as many as 50,000 office workers. The Pentagon, headquarters of the U.S. Defense Department, consists of 5 connected buildings making the shape of a pentagon. Completed in 1943, the building is the largest in the Washington, D.C. area.
The attack, of course, is not the first time the United States has been rocked by terrorist attacks. Mei Yan now reviews some of the more recent major assaults on U.S. targets.
October the 12th, 2000. A terrorist bombing kills 17 U.S. sailors aboard the USS Cole as it refuels in Yemen's port of Aden. U.S. investigators point to Saudi exile Osman bin Laden as the prime suspect. August the 7th, 1998, car bombs explode outside U.S. embassies in Nairobi, Kenya, and Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, within minutes of each other. More than 200 people are killed and thousands of others wounded. Bin Laden is again blamed for the attacks. April the 19th, 1995, a bomb rips through the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in downtown Oklahoma City at 9:02 p.m. 168 people were killed and more than 500 injured. U.S. citizen Timothy McVeigh is convicted and executed for the crime. February the 26th, 1993, a bomb explodes in a parking garage below the World Trade Center in New York. 6 people are killed and about 1,000 wounded. 6 Islamic militants are convicted of the bombing and sentenced to life in prison. December the 21st, 1988, Pan Am Flight 103 explodes over Lockerbie, Scotland. All 259 passengers and crew on board are killed, as well as 11 Lockerbie residents. 1 Libyan suspect is sentenced to life in prison and another Libyan is acquitted. 美艳 CCTV.
The price of oil surged immediately following the series of terrorist attacks on the United States. Buyers were forced into the market because of the uncertainty surrounding the attacks. London Brent blend futures hit a peak of $31.05 a barrel, the highest since December last year. On Tuesday afternoon, when London's International Petroleum Exchange suspended trading for an hour, Brent was up $3.2 or nearly 9% at $30.65. The Secretary General of the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, Ali Rodriguez, said that OPEC will make an effort to ensure price stability among world oil suppliers. The U.S. stock markets will remain closed today after the attacks on the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in New York. The attacks also had a huge impact on global financial markets. Major stock exchanges in New York City remain closed on Wednesday. Trading is expected to resume as soon as it is practical to do so. The New York Forex market continued operation today, with U.S. dollars down sharply. New York bond market, mercantile exchanges in New York and Chicago Future Exchange will be shut down throughout Wednesday. Major stock markets across Europe fell sharply yesterday. Frankfurt shares in Germany ended at 4,273, down 8%, while the London Financial Times stock market ended its lowest figures for 2 years at 4,817. The Tokyo Stock Exchange delayed opening of trade by 30 minutes today and halved the daily maximum limit on the price fluctuation for all shares. Now let's take a close look at the numbers around the major world markets. You're watching CCTV International. More news coming up. Stay with us. Chinese top legislator Li Peng meets with visiting vice chairman of the Russian State Duma, Vladimir Lukin. And Premier Zhu meets top leaders in Kazakhstan on the last leg of his official 5-country tour.
Whenever news breaks, we'll keep a close watch. Worldwide Watch, every night at 7 p.m. Beijing time, only on CCTV International.
Premier Zhu arrived in Kazakhstan to meet top leaders in the last leg of his official 5-nation tour. On Tuesday, Premier Zhu met with Russian President Vladimir Putin in the Kremlin. Both spoke highly of the recent Sino-Russian Prime Minister's meeting in St. Petersburg. As Liao Liang reports, the leaders conducted in-depth discussions on international and regional issues of common concern.
Russian President Vladimir Putin told Premier Zhu Rongji that Russia is very satisfied with the results of the regular prime ministers' meeting. He said that keeping frequent contact between the two countries' leaders is of great significance to the development of bilateral relations. He said the rapid growth of China-Russia ties in the fields of politics, economy, trade, science and technology, culture, education, health and sports is encouraging. Premier Zhu Rongji said the cooperative document signed at the Prime Minister's meeting will give a strong impetus to bilateral trade and economic cooperation, hopefully adding tens of billions of US dollars to trade volume. Zhu Rongji put forward a number of suggestions to improve the China-Russia trade balance, including the setting up of a Chinese trading center in Moscow, Russia's dispatching of a large number of businessmen and industrialists to visit China every year, and the increasing of direct trade links between large and medium-sized enterprises in the two countries. Liao Liang, CCTV.
The smooth development of strategic partnership between China and Russia conforms to the fundamental interests of the two peoples and is conducive to maintaining regional and world peace and stability. Chinese top legislator Li Peng made the remark while meeting visiting Vice Chairman of the Russian State Duma, Vladimir Lukin, on Wednesday in Beijing. Li Peng thanked Vladimir Lukin for his contribution to promoting the friendly and good neighborly relations between the two countries. He said that the China-Russia Good Neighborly Treaty of Friendship and Cooperation, signed by the two countries' heads of state in July, laid a legal foundation for developing a long-term and stable bilateral relationship. Vladimir Lukin highly praised the achievements made in Russia-China relations and said he will, as always, make unremitting efforts in forging bilateral ties. An international seminar on the new economy and perspectives of Asia-Europe trade and economic cooperation opened today in Beijing. Experts from the 25 member countries of the Asia-European Meeting, or ASEAN, are attending. The ASEAN was established in 1996, aimed at improving cooperation in trade and investment between Asia and Europe. During the three-day conference, the participants will discuss ways to enhance Asian-European cooperation in the new century. They believe that the new economy, along with the growth of information technology and internet technology, will boost cooperation between the two continents. The participants are expected to work on some ideas on how to narrow the digital gap between Asia and Europe. Chinese Vice President Hu Jintao met with former German Chancellor Helmut Kohl at the Great Hall of the People on Monday. Hu Jintao welcomed Kohl's visit to China to attend the 21st Century China and the World International Forum. He expressed his thanks for Kohl's contributions towards the smooth development of the Sino-German and Sino-European relationship. Kohl said that Germany thanked China for supporting it during the process of unification and hoped that China can realize its own reunification as soon as possible. The two sides agree that the consolidation and development of cooperative relations between the two countries is in the fundamental interests of both peoples and is conducive to the peace and stability in the region. This year marks the UN-designated Year of Dialogue Among Civilizations. On September the 11th, the 21st Century Forum, featuring a symposium called Dialogue Among Civilizations, opened in Beijing. Participants from home and abroad expressed the same belief that strengthening of dialogues is key to ensuring the healthy development of globalization and world peace. Song Jian, Vice Chairman of the National Committee of CPPCC, China's top government advisory body, spoke at the opening ceremony. He said that differences in ethnicity, religion and culture should be respected, and that conducting multicultural dialogues is an effective means to avoid or resolve world conflict. He also said that China is opposed to the idea of imposing one's own culture on other nations in the name of globalization. The two-day symposium will focus on such topics as the impact of multicultural dialogue on world history and on international relations, and the role of the United Nations in multicultural dialogue. And finally, the turf industry is an emerging sector of China's economy. It took off only 3 years ago, but it has been growing steadily. On Wednesday, an international exposition was held in Beijing to help spur more development of the turf industry and related businesses. Wang Xin has this report.
This was the third international expo on turf, landscape and equipment held in Beijing. More than 10,000 domestic and overseas business people in the sectors of turf and turf equipment attended this year's event. Although the turf industry has a short history of development in China, it has been expanding rather steadily.
And we see some very good successes as a result of the efforts that have been made in the past several years, such as improvements to the sports stadiums. Just the green and the beautification that's taking place in China today is evident of that.
However, unlike certain other emerging industries such as the internet, the turf sector has not developed at a rapid rate. Turf manufacturers say that consumers' lack of expertise in the performance of various turf varieties has been the major problem.
So we see that the future in China is dependent upon bringing education along with the products into the market and training the people that you have already working with them in the care of the grasses.
This is exactly the kind of expo that turf makers hope can educate people about the varieties of turf and turf equipment. As China's economy continues to grow, a cleaner environment has become one of people's primary needs. A growing number of cities have begun putting more grassland in neighborhoods, in parks, and along the streets to create a greener living environment. Wang Xin, CCTV.
And that's it for this edition of Worldwide Watch on CCTV International. But stay tuned with us for more updates and news on the aftermath of the terrorist attacks in the United States. I'm Lu Xing in Beijing. Thank you for watching.